The North Yemen Civil War was fought in North Yemen between royalist partisans of the Mutawakkilite Kingdom and supporters of the Yemen Arab Republic from 1962 to 1970. The war began with a coup d'état carried out by the Republican leader Abdullah as-Salil in 1962, which dethroned the newly crowned Imam Muhammad al-Badr and declared Yemen a republic under his presidency. The Imam escaped to the Saudi Arabian border and rallied popular support from northern Shia tribes to retake power, escalating shortly to a full-scale civil war. On the royalist side, Jordan and Saudi Arabia supplied military aid, and Britain gave covert support, while the Republicans were supported by Egypt and allegedly received warplanes from the Soviet Union. Both foreign irregular and conventional forces were involved. The Egyptian president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, supported the Republicans with as many as 70,000 Egyptian troops and chemical weapons. Despite several military moves and peace conferences, the war sank into a stalemate by mid-1960s. Egypt's commitment to the war is considered to have been detrimental to its performance in the Six-Day War of June 1967, after which Nasser found it increasingly difficult to maintain his army's involvement and began to pull his forces out of Yemen. The surprising removal of Salil on November 5 by Yemeni dissidents, supported by Republican tribesmen, resulted in an internal shift of power in the capital, while the royalists approached it from the north. The new Republic government was headed by Qadi Abdul Rahman Iriani, Ahmed Noman and Muhammad Ali Uthman, all of which shortly either resigned or fled the country, leaving the disarrayed capital under the control of Prime Minister Hassan Amri. The 1967 siege of Sana'a became the turning point of the war. The remaining Republican Prime Minister succeeded to keep control of Sana'a, and by February 1968, the Royalists lifted the siege. Clashes continued in parallel with peace talks between the sides, until in 1970, Saudi Arabia recognized the Republic, and a ceasefire was effected. Egyptian military historians refer to the war in Yemen as their Vietnam, and historian Michael Oren wrote that Egypt's military adventure in Yemen was so disastrous that the imminent Vietnam War could easily have been dubbed America's Yemen. Background: Yemen Imam Ahmad bin Yahya, who had inherited the Yemeni throne in 1948, was known as Ahmad the Devil by his enemies. In 1955, Iraq-trained Colonel Ahmad Thalea led a revolt against him. A group of soldiers under his command surrounded the royal palace of Al-Urdi at Taiz, a fortified stronghold where the Imam lived with his harem, the royal treasure, an arsenal of modern weapons, and a 150-strong palace guard, and demanded Ahmad's abdication. Ahmad agreed, but demanded that his son, Muhammad al-Badr, succeed him. Thalea refused, preferring the king's half-brother, the Emir Saif al-Islam Abdullah, the 48-year-old foreign minister. While Abdullah began forming a new government, Ahmad opened the treasury coffers and secretly began buying off the besieging soldiers. After 5 days, the number of besiegers was reduced from 600 to 40. Ahmad then came out of the palace, wearing a devil's mask and wielding a long scimitar, terrifying the besiegers. He slashed 2 sentries dead before exchanging the sword for a submachine gun and leading his 150 guards onto the roof of the palace to begin a direct attack on the rebels. After 28 hours, 23 rebels and 1 palace guard were dead and Thalea gave up. Abdullah was later reported executed, and Thalea was publicly decapitated. In March 1958, al-Badr arrived in Damascus to tell Nasser of Yemen's adherence to the UAR. However, Ahmad was to keep his throne and his absolute power, and the arrangement constituted only a close alliance. In 1959, Ahmad went to Rome to treat his arthritis, a rheumatism, heart trouble and, reportedly, drug addiction. Fights between tribal chieftains erupted, and al-Badr unsuccessfully tried to buy off the dissidents by promising reforms. including the appointment of a representative council, more army pay and promotions. Upon his return, Ahmad swore to crush the agents of the Christians. He ordered the decapitation of one of his subjects and the amputation of the left hand and right foot of 15 others, in punishment for the murder of a high official the previous June. Al-Badr was only rebuked for his leniency, but the Yemeni radio stopped broadcasting army officers' speeches, and talks of reforms were silenced. In June 1961, Ahmad was still recovering from an assassination attempt 4 months earlier, and moved out of the capital, Taiz, into the pleasure palace of Salah. Already defense and foreign minister, Badr became acting prime minister and interior minister as well. Despite being crown prince, al-Badr still needed to be picked by the ulama in Sana'a. Al-Badr was not popular with the ulama due to his association with Nasser, and the ulama had refused Ahmad's request to ratify Badr's title. Imam Ahmad died on September 18, 1962, and was succeeded by his son, Muhammad al-Badr. One of al-Badr's first acts was to appoint Colonel Abdullah Salal, a known socialist and Nasserist, as commander of the palace guard. Egypt. Nasser had looked to a regime change in Yemen since 1957, and finally put his desires into practice in January 1962 by giving the Free Yemen movement office space, financial support, and radio airtime. Anthony Nutting's biography of Gamal Abdel Nasser identifies several factors that led the Egyptian president to send expeditionary forces to Yemen. These included the unraveling of the union with Syria in 1961, which dissolved his United Arab Republic, damaging his prestige. A quick, decisive victory in Yemen could help him recover leadership of the Arab world. Nasser also had his reputation as an anti-colonial force, setting his sights on ridding South Yemen, and its strategic port city of Aden, of British forces. Muhammad Haikal, a chronicler of Egyptian national policy decision-making and confidant of Nasser, wrote in For Egypt Not for Nasser, that he had engaged Nasser on the subject of supporting the coup in Yemen. Haikal argued that Salal's revolution could not absorb the massive number of Egyptian personnel who would arrive in Yemen to prop up his regime, and that it would be wise to consider sending Arab nationalist volunteers from throughout the Middle East to fight alongside the Republican Yemeni forces, suggesting the Spanish Civil War as a template from which to conduct events in Yemen. Nasser refused Haikal's ideas, insisting on the need to protect the Arab nationalist movement. Nasser was convinced that a regiment of Egyptian special forces and a wing of fighter bombers would be able to secure the Yemeni Republican coup. Acute TAT. Nasser's considerations for sending troops to Yemen may have included the following: impact of his support to the Algerian War of Independence from 1954 to 62, Syria breaking up from Nasser's United Arab Republic in 1961, taking advantage of a breach in British and French relations, which had been strained by Nasser's support for the FLN in Algeria and primarily for his efforts to undermine the Central Treaty Organization, which caused the downfall of the Iraqi monarchy in 1958, confronting imperialism, which Nasser saw as Egypt's destiny, guaranteeing dominance of the Red Sea from the Suez Canal to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, retribution against the Saudi royal family, whom Nasser felt had undermined his union with Syria.